Mixing guitars can be very scary. There are so many different ways that you can mix guitars, and there's so many different plugins that you can use. When I do private mixing lessons with my students, the one question that I get more than anything, if you could buy only one plugin to mix guitars, what would it be? And I think now I can finally give a confident answer to that question with the release of the brand new FabFilter Pro Q4. So I'm putting it to the test today. Can I mix 3 different guitars in a full song with only one instance of Pro Q4 on each track? So here is the session for the song that we're going to be looking at today, and this is the guitars that we're going to be mixing. That was an excerpt from my newly released single Archetype, which is featured on the brand new Neural DSP Plenty X Sessions EP. Although for this video, what I've done is I've gotten all the guitar tones and reamped them with the new Archetype Rabea X plugin. I've always been a firm believer in that the best mixing tip you could ever give someone is to not think about mixing at all and instead focus on getting the best quality production and recordings that you can. So that when it actually does come time to mix things, you barely need to do anything at all, which is, I guess, the whole premise of this video. Quickly going through the actual tones. So first up, we have this main rhythm tone, I suppose. That's kind of in the background of the whole little thing. Next up, we have this synth guitar, which is technically still a guitar, like it's tracked on a guitar and everything, but I'm passing it through the synth module, which is, you know, all new design and everything for Archetype Rabea X, and I'm using this new glide function as well. Lastly, we have the actual lead guitar tone, and I think I literally just picked a preset that Rabea's got. Yeah, he's got new presets for the plugin. It's just this gainy lead fun times preset that I've tweaked a little bit for like delay trails and stuff like that, but this is what that sounds like. Very washed out, very ambient, lots of reverb, lots of delay, but for that part of the song, that's exactly what it needed. A lot of the new features within the Rabea X update are featured in these tones. They're all over them, like, you know, the brand new Vintage 30 IRs that are included now, and there's this new glide function in the synth, as well as like brand new synth functions altogether. You know, new EQ settings, the low and high cut and stuff like that. I'm pretty much using it to its full extent. If you like the tones that you're hearing so far, you can trial the Rabea X plugin for free for 14 days. Just head to the link in my description. So going through the rhythm tone really quickly. A little bit of overdrive, you know, typical settings, scooping out some bass. I've got the 3rd amp and 3rd cab in the Archetype Rabea. No effects, no synth, just straight, pure, high gain tone. And then as you can see, the only plugin that we have on the mix channel for that is just this one instance of Pro Q4. There is 3D balance on the bottom here, but that's just a gain staging thing. Like, I had all my automation set for this project already, and I didn't want to change anything. So this is literally just a volume knob. I'm not going to count that. Let's ignore that. It's just the one instance of Pro Q4 doing actual mixing. Quickly going through what we've got going on in this EQ graph. So as you can see, I've got 2 different low cuts here. I've got the first one being super steep at 48 dB per octave at 80 Hertz. I just want this to be super succinct and super tight in the low end, but I do like taming some of those, you know, overarching low end frequencies with a 12 dB per octave slope, which is why I've got that at 100 Hertz. So both of these working together to keep the low end nice and tight and make sure that it doesn't get in the way of kick drum and bass and all that stuff. Speaking of low end being tight, I also have a dynamic band over here, as you can see with this kind of highlighted color, pretty much going anywhere mostly from 100 to 200. But the difference being now with Pro Q4 is that we have spectral audio. So what would usually happen with a dynamic band in Pro Q3 is that it would just kind of affect the whole band and everything would duck. But with spectral audio, it kind of works in the same way that Synth does, where it's very, you know, fine. You can tell it exactly where it needs to be, and you can set attack and release settings so that it can be as quick or as slow as you need it to be. Every palm mute is different. You know, when you play guitar, you might palm mute a lower chord, you might palm mute a higher chord. different parts of the frequency spectrum are going to be accentuated when you do those. So having the spectral audio function is really handy because as you can see, when it's on, it's just targeting those exact frequencies that it needs to. And just to give the quick rundown, attack is as quick as it can be, release is just a little bit slower than that. And then as far as how fine I want those cuts to be, they're just below as maxed out as I can get it. So as you can see, depending on the chord, depending on what type of palm mute I'm doing, depending on where my hand is probably sitting on the bridge, it is reacting differently and it's keeping everything super tight and super succinct. Next up, I have a couple of different things happening in the mid-range. So I'm kind of scooping out low mids around like 290 and kind of creeping into the mids around 450. And then I'm boosting mids around 1200, kind of like creeping into the higher mids and stuff like that. And this is just essentially just like mid shaping, you know, in the context of the mix, this is what I felt like it needed. Don't go and copy the values that I've done. I'm sure you've heard that a million different times from a million different creators, but that is the worst thing that you can possibly do. If you pause the video and see that I'm using 290.07 and then copy that for your project, like it's just not going to sound the same. But what you should be doing is looking at the general scope of what it is that I'm doing, where I'm doing low cuts, where I'm doing high cuts, why I'm doing this, why I'm boosting that, and then apply that to your guitars with the amps that you're using or the plugins that you're using, with the pickups that you have, with the performance that you're playing. Up next, we have this high shelf boost. Now, this looks very full on when you're looking at it, but what I've started doing recently is not using an EQ on my master bus or my mix bus, because I don't want to kind of affect every instrument the same way. I want to do it myself, and to get it to sound as bright as like radio ready mixers do, you'd be surprised at how much high boost you actually need on certain instruments. And when I go through the example of turning this plugin on and off, the first thing you will notice is how much darker it sounds and how much flatter it sounds when this EQ is off. And this is a very much like necessary move that needs to be made. Taking out some really harsh frequencies around like 2100, 2400, 4100, just really like those were like the specific problem areas that I was hearing. So I just wanted to take them out. But what I am doing, which again with the new spectral audio function is super nice in Pro Q4, is attacking just the harsh high frequencies. So frequencies that would get in the way of things like cymbals or just general just like harsh frequencies that aren't really nice to listen to on high gain guitars. It's basically doing what Soothe would do, if you've heard of a plugin called Soothe. It's this like dynamic resonance control, but with spectral audio pretty much does the same thing. I've maxed out how fine I want those cuts to be. I've maxed out how fast I want it to attack, and with the release it's slightly slower just so it doesn't sound too phasey with things moving so quickly. But as you can see, it is dynamically attenuating those problem frequencies within, say, around like between 3 and 4K. And when I turn this band off, it becomes very apparent. It honestly is like magic, and the fact that it sounds just as full and just as like organic when it's off, or like when it's like actually attenuating, is a really nice touch. Sometimes with plugins like Soothe, like if you're not really doing it properly, you can overdo it and it sounds very artificial and very fake. But the difference between this band being on and off is very obvious from an audio perspective, but not so obvious from like it being fake sounding, if that makes sense. A little bit of a bump in the airy top end around 7500, and then just some high cuts to really slam down those super harsh frequencies. A bit higher than I usually would, but I just felt like it's what was needed for this mix. So all together, with all of these things going on, it makes the guitar tone sit in the mix just exactly where it needs to be. I'm not really changing the guitar tone too much. I'm not compressing anything. Guitar tones and high gain tones are already compressed as much as they are. It doesn't really need any more. And then on the bottom of the plugin, we now have this saturation button, which is very, very handy. So as good as this EQ is, as good as these modern EQs are, what ends up happening sometimes is that because you can get super, super fine with these adjustments and you can get things really, really slim and start, you know, dynamically, you know, altering things with spectral audio and stuff like that, like we've been talking about. It's really cool from an audio processing perspective and a mixing perspective because you can get things sounding even better. But what ends up happening is it can sound sterile sometimes because it's just like digital on digital. Like these things that we're doing here, you couldn't really do it with a console, like an analog piece of gear. And to kind of bring that character back and to make things seem not so cold, having a little saturation bump or like, you know, that's I guess half the reason why people plug things through like actual analog gear is to get that actual analog feel and that saturation going with the way that all the stuff works. You know what I mean? So being digital, it's super, super, super clean. But to get some of that back, having the saturation knob is super handy. I've just got it on the subtle option at the moment. Warm is a bit too much for this, I think, but just having it on subtle makes a big difference. And while it may seem subtle just on the one instance of guitar, when you start stacking this across like multiple instruments on multiple instances of EQ, it sounds really, really nice. And it makes it really feel like just that warm, squishy, analog-y kind of sound that is missing from a lot of modern production. So altogether with the plugin on and off with the drums in the background, the differences are pretty dire. So as you can probably tell, it sounds way darker when the EQ is off. It has nowhere near as much like clarity and diction in the playing. And, you know, in isolation, when you play it back, it might even sound a touch too bright. But in the context of a full mix, when everything is going, it needs to be this bright, especially if you're trying to chase that kind of like super processed radio ready kind of sound. One instance of Pro Q4, and it's doing everything from EQ, both static and dynamic. It's doing spectral audio. It's adding saturation. You know, I haven't even gone through half the new features in Pro Q4. Like you can do like this EQ sketch thing where you can literally draw it with your mouse and it will do it. Let's not do that because I've got this really nice one set out, but you can do that if you just want to get like a quick idea going. The coolest feature about Pro Q4 for me right now is the fact that if I hit this button here, it shows me every other instance of Pro Q4 that's happening within my mix session, which as you can see, I've got the actual lead guitar here and the synthy lead guitar. And if I hit play, the bits that are highlighted in red is what is clashing with this main heavy rhythm guitar. So it's basically showing me like what I need to fix within certain parts of the mix just in front of my eyes. Like it's a very, very cool feature. Obviously with like metal productions, everything is clashing. So obviously you need to take it with a little bit of grain of salt. But right now I am choosing to prioritize the main heavy rhythm. If I chose to prioritize the high gain lead instead, it would tell me where I need to fix things on the rhythm. But in this case, I'm going to trust my ears because I think it sounds good and everything's playing with each other nicely. Going on to the synthy kind of lead sound. So again, very standard EQ moves, nothing crazy going on here. I've got quite a substantial low cut happening because I figured that this stuff doesn't really need to be there in the context of this full mix. And I'm doing a little bit of a low shelf as well, just to cut out some of those low mids and bleed into some of those low mids a little bit. I've got these EQ moves happening here. It sounded a little bit nasally, so I kind of took out a bit of 700, but I wanted it to be a bit brighter without, you know, boosting this brightness. I just wanted it to be perceptually brighter, so I ended up boosting around 1100, taking out around 1700 just to make sure it doesn't clash with the high gain rhythm. And then again, this spectral audio thing. So as you can see, this band in particular is a very problematic band. So you can see there, it's dynamically attenuating all those super harsh synthy frequencies. If I was to solo this band, it would be just the worst sound you've ever heard in your life. Really like stings the nostrils, you know what I mean? And then after that, just giving it some air and doing a high cut, just like always, you know, standard mixing stuff. Again, adding a bit of saturation was subtle. When the plugin's off, all of this low end doesn't need to be there. All that super harsh top end doesn't need to be there. It's very mid-focused, and just when you're doing that, you are shifting the perspective. So just, again, dynamically attenuating those super harsh frequencies to make sure that it's not too bright and too harsh. That's it. You know what I mean? Like, that's like the only instance of plugin I need, I think, for this mix. I think it sounds great in the context of the full mix, just as this lead guitar does as well. So Archetype, Rabea, and then I've got it in the same track here. So just the one instance of Pro Q, very much the same. Low cut, taking out a lot of low mids, because I don't really like the sound of like low mids and lead guitar tones. It just doesn't sit right with me. And then just attenuating some of the upper mid range just so it doesn't clash too much with the high gain rhythm guitars. But again, main man of this whole Pro Q4 session is the spectral audio around the harsh frequencies over here, doing much of the same as what we've already been through, and then adding another boost in the top end. Like I said, because it's not on the instrument bus, I feel as though everything needs to be a touch brighter on their own, which is why moves like this get made, and then just kind of compensating by cutting all the super harsh stuff. So when it's off, the first thing that you can probably hear is all the extra low end that comes in. It's just like very robust and very round sounding when the EQ is off, as well as like the super harsh stuff that gets added in as well, especially around here. So just focusing in on that. In isolation, it sounds a little bit strange. It sounds like we're kind of like hindering the guitar like tone and everything. But in the context, again, of a full mix, when we play everything fits so much nicer. And what I'm gonna do now is play the song, and I'm gonna turn all the EQ instances off, and then I'm gonna turn them on, and I'm gonna A/B between them so you can hear what all of these are doing in context. So I think it's fair to say that Pro Q4 is a pretty strong contender for being like the only plugin that you would ever need to mix guitars at this point. Obviously, there are lots of different plugins on the market and they all have specific functions, and some of them do really cool things. But if you're really just looking to get the most bare bones, like you just want things to sound good and you want to do simple things well, there isn't a better plugin on the market than Pro Q4. This isn't even sponsored by them. I just love Pro Q4 that much. This video was sponsored by Neural, with Archetype Rabea again being so good, it makes it really easy to mix. And that was also kind of the point of this video as well. If you guys want to check out Archetype Rabea for free for 14 days and trial it yourself, you can check it out in the link in my description, as well as all of the other affiliate links for the things that you saw in this video. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to Neural DSP for sponsoring this video, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.